Hello YouTubers, Alaska Prepper here. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a very important video. That's why I'm putting it up. It's the third video of the day, and it's only going to cover one thing, and the title has probably already led you off to what it is. But who is the United Nations? Who is the United Nations to tell any country what they cannot do, what they should not do? They are a non-elected entity. They are a non-government organization. However, the United Nations is telling banks, central banks at that, what to do. It's going to be very interesting to me to see if our central banks follow suit as to what advice is being given by the United Nations. But one of those things that they're saying is that central banks should now start to induce price controls, or i.e. not central banks, but that instead of central banks tightening in order to fight the inflation that they've created and therefore collapsing economies all over the world, that they now should start easing and then doing price controls. Let me tell you what it means to do price controls, and then I'm going to go ahead and go over what it means to do easing, because neither are good. Price controls is when prices are set by the government. When the government says you cannot sell that flip-flop for more than $1 a pair, and then when it takes you more than $1 as the producer or manufacturer of that flip-flop, you can no longer stay in business because the government said, hey, you can't sell it for more than $1. And you say, but Mr. Government, it cost me $1.05 to make it. And the government says, I don't care. And then what do you have to do as the producer, manufacturer of that item? You have to go out of business. So it creates shortages on a mass level. And this is what the UN is suggesting that we do. Now, I went ahead and recorded a short clip first, but I forgot to include the price controls part in it. That's why I'm going ahead and talking to you about that now. But listen to this. This is where we're headed. And where we're headed, either way, is no good. As I've stated in the past, the central banks, the Federal Reserve in the case of the United States of America, and it's going to affect the entire world, has nowhere to go. Now, I found this very, very interesting. You've all noticed that the markets have been doing somewhat of a turnaround. They've been going up. I don't know what it is today. I saw it early this morning when it first opened, and it was up like 600 points. I haven't checked it lately. But they've been going up pretty good the last couple of days. Well, here the UN, the United Nations, demands all central banks stop rate hikes and switch to price controls instead. A recipe for disaster. That is exactly what this is. A recipe for disaster. And who is the United Nations to demand that central banks stop rate hikes? Well, does it really matter, ladies and gentlemen? Because our central banks part of the government? Is the Federal Reserve part of a federal institution? No, it's not. Does the Federal Reserve answer to the American people? No, it does not. So if the Federal Reserve takes its marching orders from the UN, you can see two things if this happens right here. You can see that we are going to have inflation a lot higher than what we have now. This is what's called a pivot. All right, the Fed will pivot from tightening to easing, meaning that instead of sucking money out of the economy, they're now going to start flushing the economy with quantitative easing, with more money. When that happens, the Dow Jones or the markets will have a crack up boom. More money in the economy, the more dollars that it takes to buy a certain thing, anything. So the more money in the economy, the weaker that the dollar is going to get, the higher that the Dow is going to get, and even the higher that gold and silver will get, because that's what they are. They are a bellwether for inflation, for the economy. That's what gold and silver are. They act as a bellwether. They tell you whether there's too much money or not enough money in the economy by its price. So you've noticed that gold and silver have started to go up as well. The problem with this is this. When we have inflation at this rate and even higher, which is going to get even higher if the central banks do this, it's that the people that are the working class, the people that work for their money, not the wealthy that have assets, right? When you have an asset, let's say I have a painting, a Mona Lisa. Let's say that I own the original Mona Lisa, right? Which is priceless, but so that's a bad example. But let's say that I have an expensive painting and inflation starts to roar. Well, that painting is an asset. It will go up in price as well. But let's say that if I'm a working person that's just living from hand to mouth, living paycheck to paycheck, like 60% of Americans already do, inflation is only going to diminish what you earn, because you may still be earning the same, but you're going to buy a lot less with what you earn. So it is your labor that is being stolen from you. But the reason that I find this more interesting than the phenomenon of what is inflation is that it's the UN who is demanding that central banks stop rate hikes. It'll be very interesting to see if it does happen. If the pivot occurs now, after the UN is demanding that central banks reverse course, it'll be very interesting to see that who it is that the central banks are really taking their orders from. Prepare for the inevitable. And the inevitable, ladies and gentlemen, is that the purchasing power of those dollars that you work for on a daily basis is going to continue to be diminished at a higher and higher rate. All right, so don't fool yourselves into thinking that if you have cash and you just keep it, that eventually you're going to be able to buy a lot more with that cash. There may be a very short term where you can, because we fall into a deflationary crisis that will last a little bit of time and then it'll shoot right up. But eventually that cash will be worth zero. The way that hyperinflation works, if I can explain it to you this way real quick, in terms of something that has nothing to do with money, all right? So the way that hyperinflation works is like this. Let's say, for example, that you were cooking a steak, all right? Because this weekend I had my in-laws over and I cooked up some really nice 1.5-inch thick porterhouses. Awesome. Well, I have an air fryer, and yes, I use an air fryer to cook my steaks and they come out perfect. Well, what you do is with the air fryer that I have, is the Ninja Foodie, by the way, if you want to get it, awesome air fryer, is it's got a thermometer, and you take it and you stick it in the middle of the meat, and then you place it in there and it starts to cook, and on the screen in the front it tells you how hot the middle of the meat is getting as it cooks longer and longer. Well, in the beginning it takes a while to see that temperature rise. So it might take about a minute or two before the temperature in the middle of the meat starts to rise by a degree, and then it might take 30 seconds for it to be another degree, and so forth. But by the time that it starts getting to its target temperature, which for me it's about 131 degrees, medium well, or medium, right, 131 degrees. By the time it gets to like 125 degrees, the time that it takes for it to go from 1 degree to another is a lot faster than what it took when I first started cooking it. That's how inflation works. It's nice and slow and steady in the beginning, but then in the end, it goes like this, like a hockey stick. I hope that makes sense to you, because that is how it works. It's slow and steady in the beginning, and then towards the end, it's going to go straight up. And a lot of people are going to get caught off guard.
Nutrient survival isn't just survival food. It's special ops grade. Built to the nutritional standards of the U.S. Special Ops and packed with 40 essential nutrients. Formulated to sustain energy, sharpen focus, and keep you and your family thriving during any emergency. Real food, real ingredients.